Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will continue our discussion of Chapter 2 of Freemasons for Dummies by Christopher Hodap.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we have Craig Graham, who is a member of Kalamalka Lodge in, I'll get it eventually, number 160 in British Columbia. David Colbeth, a member of King Solomon number 60 right here in Washington, and I'm Matt Appel, and I'm a member of Mill Creek number 243 here in also, I was going to say sunny, but it was pretty rainy today, Washington. And we are going to continue, as I said, our discussion of Chapter 2 of Freemasons for Dummies. We sort of left off after the establishment of Prince Hall and Masonry coming to the shores of the colonies over here in North America. And there's actually a brief section here about the French Revolution, which we sort of discussed previously. So I'm just going to blow right past that one. And then it talks about the 1800s and the spread of Masonry throughout North America. As people spread across, so did Masonry. So.
And in the blue room, we call the blue room our chatting opportunity in between shows and before shows and stuff. And Craig was talking about how Webb's publishing of the Masonic Monitor, the Freemasons Monitor, was really a turning point. In addition to some other things we'll get to here, but yeah, I would agree that having a formalized, it's funny to think. It's been really enjoyable for me to really kind of dive in and learn about some of these things, even though it's out of this yellow book called Freemasons for Dummies. But it's not necessarily, we're not cracking open some dusty book from a shelf. But Chris has done such a great job of summarizing all this information for us, and so it's, I knew, but Webb had done that, but had created the ritual for us. But to understand that being a pivotal opportunity for us, that there was maybe multiple versions of things and standard works. And we think of, well, this is the way it's always been done. Well, no, not only since 1797, and even then it was still different. Even though he had his version of it, there's still different versions of it. And especially the Scottish Rite, from France. How does that work, right?
I was doing some research a little while ago because I had to deliver the Pillars lecture on the second degree, and I've got a copy of Duncan's ritual monitor, and so I was kind of comparing my lodge in British Columbia fundamentally uses an American style of ritual, and I was comparing that to Duncan's, and it got me thinking about what was there a time when there was a lot of different ritual running around in North America. Webb went a long way to kind of air quotes standardizing it, but you still notice significant differences jurisdiction to jurisdiction as you go along. The framework is the same, but there's a lot of things that I understand Pennsylvania work. It does quite a bit of different work than a lot of other states around it. And I've always been curious as to kind of what did it look like as Freemasonry was moving through the colonies and the states and getting established and provincial grand lodges forming. What did I always wonder what all of that looked like.
That's an interesting question. One of the things in my head, one of the potential reasons for differences is, as we talked about in the last episode, there were still ancients and moderns when a lot of the provincial grand lodges here were established. So I imagine, although I've never read either ritual, I imagine that there's a fair amount of difference in between those rituals, and that probably had accounted for some of the spread. And frankly, a lot of it, I'm sure, was just, you have 20 guys who learn something mouth to ear, you're going to get, 25 different rituals when they repeat it.
The old telephone game, yeah.
Yeah, and here in Washington, as I said on the last episode, Grand Lodge of Washington is a spinoff of the Grand Lodge of Oregon, and I do the third degree lecture for my lodge. I got to go see a third degree in Oregon, and it was really great. But I was following along in my head. I was almost word for word exactly what I knew for the whole first page, And I sort of turn the page mentally in my head to the second page, and it just completely different. Just I don't know what happened. Somebody, it just goes totally different direction than ours does, and it's just kind of amazing to me how two Grand Lodges that are so close together, they were even established relatively close together in time, are now so different.
And now to wonder how much other parts of their standard work is different too. That's what draws me.
Yeah.
And I think too, because Steve and our lodges are about 45 minutes apart here in BC. And we both use what's called the ancient work in British Columbia, which is fundamentally, sometimes you'll hear guys up here refer to it as American ritual, but I needed Steve to send me a copy of his lodge's ritual because it's different than mine. It's not on a standard, because British Columbia sort of formed a date in the 60s when any new lodges after that had to use the prescribed rituals, and we use, fundamentally there's two of them. There's a couple of others that are out there, but there's two main ones which are Canadian and ancient, and amongst those ones are various versions. And you can go to another lodge and that's doing the same work you are, but you hardly recognize it. It's something very different. And even ours has changed a little bit over time. And that's something, just decide that they just kind of move in a new direction with it. And I always think of the early years of Freemasonry on this continent as being something like that.
It's fascinating to me that those things can happen, especially within the same jurisdiction. I would say, that you can have different rituals. I guess it draws the question: what's the purpose of standard work?
Yeah,
if it's not going to be standard, especially within a jurisdiction.
Especially an odd conflict that happened up here for so many years was American or ancient ritual is generally built around doing all of your business in the Master Mason degree. Canadian ritual is built around doing all of your business in the first degree. So, but the Constitution for a long time up here said you had to do everything in the third degree. So there was this kind of little bit of I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like playing Twister with Masonic ritual with the Canadian lodges, where they kind of had to start at the first, get up to the third, do their stuff, and then go back to the first. And it was a really the regulations have changed on that now. It's a lot, you can conform much more to what your ritual is. But if you go to Alberta or Ontario or Saskatchewan, where Canadian ritual is the dominant, they do everything in the first degree. Whereas I was always used to doing everything. And same with you guys in Washington. Everything, all of your workaday Freemasonry is done in the third degree. And again, you wonder, how did that come to be? What led to one group of people somewhere doing it one way and another group of people doing it another way? What's the history behind that?
Yeah, we actually allow business on the first degree, and so
Okay.
yeah, and so it's but for us to get to the first degree, we have to you have to either open the first degree and stay there, or if you're going to do any kind of work on the second or third degree, like of a proficiency or something at all, installation of an officer you forgot about, or maybe wasn't at an installation. Now you have to open a third degree, install that man, and then call down. We call it or suspend and resume, suspend the lodge on the third degree and open a lodge on the first degree on Apprentice Masons. But there's other jurisdictions, isn't it, in yours, where you can move up the degrees if you want. We don't have that ability to move up a degree. We can only resume if we previously opened on a degree.
Okay.
So, but there's some jurisdictions you can move up and down the scales, essentially, which it would kind of make sense to me that would be, it's the same language. If you just said, I'm going to suspend labor on the first degree and open a lodge of Master Masons, what's the difference? I don't really get the purpose. It must have been somebody that just didn't like it, and he must have been on jurisprudence. And oh, sorry,
he didn't like the guy in the other state too. That was the problem.
Right,
yeah,
right, exactly. Well, it is fascinating how, I guess I still have this. There's a little bit of a dark area in my mind about how he moved, and he talks about moving from the taverns to the temples, but he does kind of lay it out here pretty well how that kind of occurred. And especially in the next section that's coming up. But it was more of it was interesting that he talks about how it was a opportunity for the frontiers folks to come together and to socialize and to have these extravagant shows put on, essentially, especially for the men, as Masons only. But they couldn't do that upstairs in the community hall or above the tavern anymore, or whatever, the storage room above the tavern anymore. So they need to have their own buildings and their own temples. And they wanted to call them temples because they, are in reminiscence of King Solomon's temple. And so part of me thinks we should return to the tavern. No, maybe. I don't know, to some extent. If you got 10 guys in a massive lodge room, should you still instead be in the back room of the tavern or in the upper room of the tavern and return to the social? I mean, I like the ceremonial side of Freemasonry, but I also enjoy the social side. We started a kind of a club, if you will, that is, while there's an absolute element of social, and we still have a philosophical bent too. Our discussions focus around something philosophical and Masonic. But matter of fact, tomorrow, yes, is a fifth Monday. So we have Mondays are Masonic for us in our lodge. And being it's a fifth Monday, we were trying to decide what we wanted to do on the fifth Monday. And so I've coveted those globe liquor cabinets. You see where the top of the globe opens up, and there's a bar in there inside of the globe top. And so the guys got me one of those for my installation. They presented it to me for installation. So it's been sitting at our lodge, kind of in the corner, and we haven't had an opportunity to really use it. And so we said, what are we going to do in this fifth Monday? And one of the guys said, why don't we have a Masonic discussion, have a real philosophical discussion? We open it up to kind of everybody. We'll do it in our preparation. We call it the preparation room, but it's really our men's lounge. And we can open it up. And I said, we can roll the globe in there and we'll call it the Global Conference on Masonry. And they laughed. They said, yes, that's why you have the V in front of your name, David. So anyway, tomorrow night we're going to have the Global Conference on Masonry at King Solomon Lodge and discuss something philosophical. There's a couple of ideas floating around, but it'll be fun. You can have a beverage or not, and just really we'll sit and look at each other in the comfort of the couches rather than in the dining hall or in the lodge room. And we won't open lodge specifically, but it'll be good. I'm hoping there'll be enough guys to enjoy that. But again, so it's our version. All that to say is a kind of our version of the tavern, if you will. Kind of going back to that idea, and maybe that's really where Masonry came from, or it should be.
See, I like that idea. I think that's a great idea. Having kind of a club night. I wouldn't want to see us go back to having our meetings at the Red Rooster Tavern where we're competing with Wing Night and or borrowing space at the Legion and having to listen to the meat draw in the other room or something like that. I really don't know that we'll benefit from doing that, but certainly something like you're talking about, like a club night almost, where casual dress, doors open at 6, come in, have a drink, sit down, a little bit of social time. Does anybody have any topic that they want to discuss? I can see you can go back and you can see where the seed of all of this came from, if that's the way it was done a long time ago. And it I just in the era of widescreen TVs and the bars, I don't think it would be as practical. But to go to something like you're talking about, where you can get together for another night, sort of a third space kind of idea, I think is excellent. We've started doing that a little bit here in Vernon, and as Steve's talked about it on the podcast as well, where his lodge is trying to figure out which way they want to go, whether they're going to be a lodge or more of a social lodge. But I mean, to add what you're doing to add into it, I think is an excellent idea.
And in my personal opinion, I think you need to have both. I need to have a lodge, and you need to have the social aspects of those things. And boy, if you can meld them together in some fashion, and kind of almost provide, while we're not McDonald's, we're not providing the same thing to everybody all the time. It's not a stamped lodge, but there's some people say, I agree. There's some people, you have to have, what's your culture? What is your lodge about? And there's a very good friend of mine, we've had him on the show before. there's his philosophy that we need to be a little more esoteric and a little less, so, not the rowdy social, what you might think of, your community-based social, whatever. And while I would tend to agree with that to some extent, I think you need to have a little bit of balance. I coined, I don't know if I said it on the pod before, but after thinking about what we want to be as a lodge, I'd like to coin the phrase a fulcrum lodge, where we are balanced in multiple areas. And we enjoy our ritual. We're good at that. We're ceremonial when we need to be, but we also have a good time and enjoy each other and social, and then also meld those together where you have the social and the esoteric at the same time, potentially. So I'm hoping that's going to happen.
There's even another slight element you can look at here too. And if you go back to frontier Freemasonry, and suddenly coonskin caps start coming into my mind here, and leather
Sure.
apparel with the fringes on it and things like that. Even though I think a lot of that is mythical, but these guys would probably have had the same discussions about their lodges that we're having right now. But you also think that there was actually also an element of survival that was attached to it.
Yeah.
At that point, they were in a much rougher environment, and so to find lodges out in the middle of nowhere on the frontier was often a beacon for a lot of people that were traveling at that time. And that's I sometimes think that that's something that we've lost when we have discussions about our lodges now.
Yeah. And maybe that frontiersman too, where he's out trapping or hunting or whatever he's doing, kind of you think of the lonely cowboy on the trail and coming into the town, and he's goes to the bar and has a drink or whatever he does, has his meal, and then talking to a few guys, and all of a sudden he realizes, oh, there's this lodge happening upstairs, whatever. Oh, come on up. And then I always got a little bit of camaraderie. So as he travels from town to town or area to area, he may be able to connect with a local brother or a local lodge and have that community built in, if you will.
And also a bit of an insurance of survival in some circumstances as well.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, and you hear a lot of Masonic lodges having been over like general stores and that sort of stuff too, where the guy who operated the general store in town was a Mason, and so they met it upstairs or at his place or whatever. And
yeah,
every once in a while someone will tell me, oh, the first building they used to build when they started a new town was the Mason's Lodge, and I always think to myself, I think they built themselves a house first, and there's probably a church and a few other things, but still the Masons found their way to how to have a meeting and how to get together early on, it seems, in most towns.
If I had to guess, the first two buildings built in any town were a church and a bar, church and a tavern.
It seems likely.
You were supposed to be in one, but more likely you were found in the other, and I just don't want to see us end up in the strip malls. That's all. I don't want to see us beside between a laundromat and a used bookstore. I don't know that will ever. I'd always like to think we could do a little better than that.
Funny you should say that. My lodge has met at two different strip malls since I've been a Mason.
Isn't there's a temple board that owns a strip mall up there, isn't there? Is that I think
yeah, there's a couple of them. I know, I guess Wenatchee, it isn't a strip mall, but it's close.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's certainly not uncommon.
Okay.
But no, I would prefer that we had a better facility than that too. And I certainly felt that way when we were meeting in the strip malls. That's for sure. So the sort of next section, if I'm following along with what we're talking here, starts to talk about the Morgan affair. And I think we're going to try and have a special guest on to discuss the Morgan affair. So I will protect his identity in case it doesn't work out. But hopefully we will get to that. Suffice it to say, there was a strong anti-Masonic period in the United States in the first half of the 19th century. And as one of the bits of trivia I have ingrained into my children is the only third party to ever carry a state in the United States presidential election is the anti-Masonic party. So it was a serious movement that
definitely come back and listen to the section. And I think regardless of our delay in having this conversation about this section, I think our special guest would be more than willing to come on and talk with us. And that based on our schedule, for those of you listening now, based on our schedule, that probably won't happen until first part of July, somewhere in there. So while you're listening to this, probably in the middle of June, I think, based on our schedule, or first part of June anyway. Then that Morgan Affair section, regardless of him being able to join us, we'll definitely do some more in-depth discussion about the Morgan Affair in this area at that section. So just before chapter 3.
All right. So then we sort of, if we're skipping over that chunk there, then we get into the sort of the golden age of Masonry, or of not Masonry necessarily, but of fraternalism in the United States, sort of in the period between I guess, before and during and after the Civil War, and moving up into World War II, where there were all sorts of fraternal organizations founded in the United States they weren't all founded in the United States, but spreading in the United States. The Elks and the Moose and the Eagles and the Kiwanis and the Rotarians and the et cetera, et cetera. A lot of these groups were formed, the Knights of Columbus, in this period where fraternalism was getting to be very big, and fraternal organizations here in the States. I think the Eagles actually started in Seattle, as I recall. I think that's one of my.
I think you're right, Matt. And it was largely the in the entertainment world, I believe.
Sure.
So early enough that the radio and television weren't even around yet. But I think it was like actors, theater people, that kind of thing was how the Eagles kind of got their start.
So, and this is also similarly, we talked briefly sort of about Scottish Rite and York Rite, which started earlier than this, but this is also when a lot of the ancillary bodies to Masonry came to be. Eastern Star and Amaranth, and the Shrine is it this year is the 150th anniversary of the Shrine? I think so.
Yeah.
And so the Shrine and a lot of these groups sort of came into being at this time period. I remember talking with my wife's family about this once, and them saying that basically, in the whatever, before the days of television, that sort of thing, what were you going to do on a Tuesday night? Well, Tuesday night you went to the Eagles, and Thursday night you went to the Elks, and Friday night was the Masons, and whatever. Is just sort of how you socialized and met with people and had fun and that sort of thing. And I guess that's how it all became so popular. I'm not quite sure what the spark that lit that was.
Yeah, I think it definitely is. Like you said, it's an opportunity for joining and being social. And he talks about people, you didn't used to have air conditioning and other things. And so you sat on your front porch to get cooled off, and you chat with your neighbors and get to know people. And you didn't have TV and internet and all those things to pay attention to, or other organizations necessarily. Then he talks a little bit later about the yacht clubs and bridge clubs and all kinds of things happening, social organizations, if you will, small as they are, some bigger, but that was all happening and led to the idea of these organizations and the popularity of them.
So television ruined all of that, and thank God the internet came along and fixed that problem, right?
There's a guy there's a guy that I know. I won't say his name. We in between Scottish Rite degrees one Saturday morning, we were chatting around, 3 or 4 of us, and he looked at me. We were discussing ideas and how the country's going to hell and all that. And he looked at us seriously and he said, "Well, what really started it all was pantyhose and television." And he went on for 45 minutes about his philosophy, how pantyhose and television just corrupted the whole United States population. And to some extent, maybe it's a little bit of a stretch, but he was serious. Anyway, sorry.
So yeah, it seems like every time there's a war, when the war concludes, almost every time, when the war concludes, there's a sudden surge in fraternal interest. It seems, at least.
Yeah.
At least that held up until, well, I don't know about Korea, but certainly not the Vietnam War. But after the Civil War and World War I, World War II, there was definitely a surge in interest in fraternal organizations.
There's different attitudes for sure in the late 60s and early 70s that, not necessarily because of the Vietnam War, but during the Vietnam War, the era, if you will, a different attitude of people. So that certainly changed things. But yeah, for sure. We lost one of my mentors just this last week, deputy, my deputy when I was becoming a Mason, and Bud Cook. Yeah, very wish Bud Cook. Gosh, I always wanted to get him on the show, and he passed unexpectedly. Actually, it's very tragic. We've had, in the last 60 days, 3 of our past deputies of our district go, and not expected. And ironically, I don't want to say anything necessarily that it's out of line, but as I understand, in all 3 cases, they had falls and weren't being good Masons, weren't using their walker, you weren't talking with people, weren't letting people know, and not, oh, I got this. Well, anyway, but yeah, it's a sad situation. But anyway, Bud would, he was a great guy, and we'll miss him dearly. We'll definitely miss him dearly. But he was a Vietnam era Mason, if you will, at that age, and so he happened to be a Mason, but most of his friends aren't. And so, he considered himself kind of the skipped generation. So definitely had interesting things to say about that. I mean, one of the things, going back just a little bit, the price of being a joiner, Chris talks about in the book, is I really like how he lays it out, and I'd like to extrapolate this. My version of the book is 10 years old now, or it's almost 12 years old, the second edition. And so he only goes to 2012, but he extrapolates the amount of dues and the amount of costs that a guy would spend in 2012 dollars. When was it here? What year was it? I don't think he puts a year on it. Anyway, when they were, the average fraternal lodge member, he says, spent $50 a year on dues and insurance, and $200 on initiation fees and other paraphernalia and banquets and travel. Well, those dollars in 2012, which is again 12 years ago, would have been $1,300 on dues and over $5,000 on food and travel and other Masonic expenses. And so if we could probably double those numbers, I would guess. Would you want to guess that, Matt? I think I would. Pretty close to that. I mean, it's just in 12 years, it seems like it's gone up significantly more, right? Because he says that was based on an average salary of between $10,000 and $13,000 a year. So I think the average salary is more like $30,000 or $40,000 a year now, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Nationwide. And he said they were spending between 50 and 60% of their salary to be a Mason. Remember, in general, fraternal organizations. Now, he also says that because of that insurance, there's an insurance factor potentially built into the fraternal organization. But still, even if you're only spending 10% of most salaries these days, or 5% of salaries these days, it would probably triple or quadruple most dues or most costs to be a Mason. That guys frown on raising your dues from $20 to $60 a year. We have had whole shows on that, but anyway.
Oh, I know. And that problem's been around for that conversation has been going on for decades now.
Yeah.
When I started watching this podcast, you guys were going into Dwight Smith's paper that was written back about 1960 or 61, right? Yeah. In that, I think, because I think that paper's already had its 50th anniversary. But Smith was talking about that same thing 50 years ago. He says we're giving this away, basically. We're selling it way too cheap. You know, so that's not at all a new conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Which is sad, having the same conversations over and over and over again. Yeah. Well, and he does kind of finish up this section talking about how there's a bit of a resurgence. And again, this is even 12 years old, and so I think there's even more of a resurgence happening, but he talks about the different things television, movies, and books, and Dan Brown effect and things like that. And I put a star next to the National Treasure because I'll admit I'm a bit of a National Treasure baby. That's in 2006 is when that came out, and Zane McCune has a great presentation. He talks about at our leadership retreat about this process and how the Dan Brown and National Treasure effect how it changed, how there was a bump in membership. I joined in 2008 essentially as a consequence of those movies and those books and whatnot. So it wasn't that I went to I found my nearest Masonic lodge. I talked to my uncle who was a Shriner for 50 years, but I didn't know I was supposed to ask, right? I tell guys at my lodge, I was, as a police explorer, I stood out front as a 17-year-old, 16-year-old student at the local high school in Auburn, where I'm a member of the lodge now. I'd stand out front of the lodge in Main Street in Auburn in the way, directing traffic for parades and stuff, and didn't know Masonry existed, standing right in front of a Masonic lodge, and didn't know anything about DMLA or any of that kind of stuff. But there I was standing right there, and wasn't affected by it, didn't know anything about it.
Yes, so I hear a lot of guys talk about a resurgence. I don't personally see it in the numbers. If you want to argue there are more active Masons or there are more, I don't know what, but if you just look at the Grand Lodge numbers year after year for Washington, there's not like we're not gaining people. So I don't know that brings us back to, we've had a couple of conversations about the refining or dying conversation. And that's I guess I just wonder. I'd like to believe there's a resurgence, but I don't know that I've seen it yet with my own eyes. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, it might be a bit of a stretch to call it a surge. Reinterest, that might be better. Reinterest for sure. Although I do, if we go back a few shows from the Conference of Grandmasters, Linda talked about in their program, which I happen to have their book here on the path forward, that what is it? What did she say? 80 or 85% of the inquirers aren't being followed up with. I mean, if we want a resurgence, just pick up the phone, guys. Pick up the phone. 85 out of 100. I mean, think about it. 85 out of 100 people that knock on our door that ask about Masonry, according to the survey, aren't getting an answer, which is sad. And we think, oh, we got to raise dues. We can't raise dues. We got 85 guys that want to come in. Yeah.
We need numbers. Yeah, I hear that one. We need, we just don't get the numbers out like we used to.
Yeah. Now, granted, 85, maybe, maybe not all 85 of those would, I hate to use the word qualify, but would eventually become a Mason either. But, they're knocking on the door. And we're only responding to 15% of them. And then we say not all 15 of those would probably become a Mason. So we're talking out of 100 guys, 1 or 2 are becoming a Mason potentially. I don't know. Anyway, we could talk for hours on that.
So rather than talk for hours on that, though, I think we're going to wrap up our discussion of Chapter 2 here. Again, there might be a further addendum to Chapter 2 coming up soon, but we'll work on that and let you know if and when it happens. And if you'd like that to happen, or if you don't want us to talk anymore about Chapter 2, please let us know. But until then, I look forward to talking to you again then. On behalf of Craig Graham of Kalamalka Lodge number 160, and David and myself, and the absent Steve, I figure if I practice, eventually I'll get it right. We thank you for listening, and we look forward to talking to you next time on the Working Tools Podcast. Goodbye.